He vanished from her life with a single message, but 5 years later, at a crowded holiday resort, the billionaire who once broke her heart heard 3 boys laughing, and realized they all had his eyes. Ethan Rhodes sat in his office long after the city below had gone dark, the skyline stretching out in cold neon lines beneath the glass. The message he had just sent still glowed on the screen of his phone. "I don't want to see you like this." He had rewritten it 4 times, each version worse than the last, because there was no right way to say the wrong thing. He told himself it was better than admitting the truth pulsating in his chest, the truth he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. He wasn't ready. He didn't know how to be the kind of man she needed. He didn't know how to be a father. He barely knew how to exist without everything spiraling out of control. The soft click of the door made him stiffen. Lily Harper stood there, small and trembling, her hands clasped protectively over her stomach as if shielding the life growing inside her from his words. She wasn't trying to accuse him of anything, she never had. Still, guilt crawled under his skin like fire. "So that's it," she said quietly, her voice frayed at the edges. "You don't want to see me. Not like this." He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he would fall apart. He kept his gaze fixed on the city, though the lights blurred in his peripheral vision. "Lily, I can't handle this right now." She stepped into the room, slow and hesitant, as though approaching something dangerous. Her blue eyes glistened, catching the faint light from the desk lamp. "You think I planned this? You think I wanted to ruin your perfect, controlled world? I didn't ask for your money, your name, anything. I just told you the truth because I thought you had the right to know." The words stabbed deeper than she realized. He had the right to know, but he didn't have the right to keep her. He didn't trust himself to. His childhood had been a gallery of wounds he never healed from, full of parents who tore at each other and at him with equal cruelty. Everything in him screamed that history would repeat itself if he let her too close. "You deserve something better than what I can give," he forced out. "You deserve stability. You deserve someone who won't fail you." "I never asked you to be perfect," she whispered. "I just hoped you wouldn't walk away." The silence that followed was suffocating. She waited, hoping he would take back the message, hoping he would say anything that resembled the man she had let herself care for. But fear wrapped around his throat, and the words wouldn't come. He wished she could see his shaking hands, his racing thoughts, the battle inside him, but all she saw was distance. Her breath hitched, and for the first time since he'd known her, she stepped back from him. "I guess I understand now." He turned toward her at last, but too late. She was already at the door, wiping at the corners of her eyes with the back of her hand, trying not to fall apart in front of him. "Lily," he began, but she shook her head. "I don't want to beg you to care. I won't." Her voice cracked, but her spine straightened with a quiet strength he had always admired. "Goodbye, Ethan." She left without another word. The click of the closing door echoed painfully through the room, and the emptiness that followed was instant, heavy, and absolute. He stood frozen, staring at the spot where she had been just seconds before. He could have gone after her. He could have stopped her. Instead, he let her walk out of his life, believing it was safer for her that way. Only later, when the city lights flickered against the windows like dying stars, did he allow himself to sink into the chair and press both hands over his face. He told himself again that he had done the right thing, that she would be better off without him, that the children, he corrected himself with a tremor, would grow up happier with someone who didn't carry the shadows he did. But the truth gnawed at him. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to protect himself from the possibility of loving someone so deeply he could lose everything again. In the silent, cavernous office, his phone rested face up on the desk, the message to Lily still glowing on the screen. It looked colder now, crueler, final in a way he hadn't meant. He reached for it as if to erase it, but the moment had already passed. Lily was gone. And he had no idea that the life she carried, 3 tiny, beating hearts, would one day destroy every barrier he had ever built and change everything he thought he knew about himself. 5 years passed in a way that didn't feel like years at all, but like one long, unbroken season of work, silence, and a loneliness so familiar that Ethan eventually stopped noticing it. Rhodes Tech expanded, profits soared, magazines called him a visionary, investors called him unstoppable, and he accepted every compliment with the same empty nod. In truth, he lived on autopilot. He filled his days with meetings, negotiations, and late-night strategy sessions, anything to avoid the quiet moments when memories of Lily pressed in too close. The penthouse he once imagined sharing with someone remained cold and impeccably organized, a museum curated by a man who didn't live there so much as hide. Sometimes, in those rare hours when exhaustion forced him to slow down, he found himself standing in the doorway of the one room he never finished. He had stopped renovating it the week she left, and nothing inside had changed: a half-assembled bookshelf, unopened boxes, a soft gray rug still rolled up along the wall. He told himself it wasn't a nursery, that it had never been intended for anything at all, yet he never repurposed it. He couldn't bring himself to. The thought of touching it felt like admitting how much he'd wanted something he'd never allowed himself to claim. In moments of weakness, he would unlock his private phone and scroll up through the old messages. There weren't many. Lily had always been careful not to cross lines, always respectful of boundaries he now wished he'd let her break. The last message from him, the one he regretted every day, sat at the top like a wound that refused to close. He had tried to write her again that first week, but by the time he worked up the nerve, she was gone. Her number was disconnected, her apartment empty, and no forwarding address could be found. He could have traced her through other methods, he had resources most people didn't, but something in him believed he had lost the right. He told himself she deserved peace, even if that peace excluded him entirely. Meanwhile, Lily built a life far from the city that had consumed her. The small Nevada town wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, quiet, and forgiving. She found work at a mountain resort hotel, helping manage events and eventually coordinating seasonal celebrations. Her days were busy and tiring, but she never allowed herself to complain when 3 small boys came running to her at the end of each shift, demanding hugs and retelling their adventures with uncontainable excitement. Lucas, Landon, and Liam were nearly identical in appearance: dark hair, bright blue eyes, the kind of energetic charm that made strangers smile at them wherever they went. Each had a personality entirely his own, though. Lucas was thoughtful, Landon mischievous, and Liam affectionate to the point of climbing into her lap any chance he got. They were her joy, her pride, the miracle she had fought to protect even when the world felt unbearably heavy. She sometimes wondered whether Ethan ever thought of them. She doubted he imagined 3 children, and she never let her mind linger long enough to picture what might happen if they ever crossed paths again. She had learned to cherish what she had instead of mourning what she lost. Still, in the quiet moments after the boys fell asleep, she occasionally caught herself thinking about the man she once believed she could trust. She wondered if he had changed, if he ever regretted pushing her away, if he still carried that haunted look she had seen in his eyes the night she left. Yet life demanded so much of her that she rarely had time to indulge questions with no answers. She focused on her children, her work, and the small community that embraced her without judgment. Her days were not always easy, money was tight, especially with 3 growing boys, but she made do with determination and a softness that seemed to multiply instead of diminish. While Lily's world slowly filled with laughter and warmth, Ethan's world only grew colder. His wealth increased, his influence expanded, but nothing touched him the way her smile once had. He had never heard her laugh again, not the real one, the one that bubbled up unexpectedly and made everything feel slightly brighter. He didn't realize until that sound disappeared from his life how much he had depended on it to soften the sharp edges of his days. 5 years changed them in different ways. Lily grew stronger in the face of hardship, building a family entirely on love. Ethan hollowed himself out without even noticing, believing he deserved the emptiness he lived in. Their paths seemed set on trajectories that would never intersect again. But fate, patient and unhurried, had been setting the stage all along. And the moment when their worlds would collide once more was already approaching, waiting quietly behind the turning of another year. The mountain resort was alive with holiday energy, filled with guests in shimmering winter coats, children pulling their parents toward the enormous Christmas tree in the lobby, and staff hurrying to finish last-minute decorations. Ethan arrived with the intention of staying no more than one night, maybe two if the corporate board insisted on his presence. The hotel had been chosen for its exclusivity and privacy, the kind of place where CEOs could relax without the weight of reporters waiting outside. He didn't expect anything more than another polished evening of polite conversations and hollow toasts. He certainly didn't expect anything that would alter the course of his carefully controlled life. His assistant handed him a schedule and murmured something about the New Year's Eve gala, but Ethan barely listened, mechanically nodding as he surveyed the lobby. He noticed, distantly, that the resort looked warm and inviting, wooden beams, soft lighting, large windows showing the snow drifting outside. It should have felt festive, comforting even, but for Ethan it was simply another place to endure until he could return to the familiar silence of his penthouse. He had grown immune to celebration. While he stood waiting for the concierge to finish confirming his suite, Ethan heard the sharp, bright laughter of a child nearby. He didn't look at first. Resorts were full of families, and children's laughter was hardly unusual during the holidays. But then the sound came again, higher, fuller, layered with the kind of pure joy he hadn't experienced in years. Something about it tugged at a place in his memory he didn't visit often, a place he tried very hard to keep shut. He finally turned his head, and froze. 3 boys raced across the lobby, weaving through guests with the agility of small whirlwinds. They looked about 5 years old, dressed in matching winter sweaters that did nothing to contain their restless energy. What stunned Ethan wasn't their playfulness but their appearance: dark hair tousled as if it never stayed still, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and faces so similar they could only be brothers. Their laughter echoed again, and the sound struck him harder than he expected, catching him completely off guard. For a moment he thought he was imagining it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even the leftover weight of guilt, he could blame any of those things for why his heart suddenly raced. But then one of the boys darted closer to him, chasing a paper snowflake that had fallen from a decoration above. The child looked up briefly, just long enough for Ethan to see the exact shade of blue he had seen once before, the exact shape of eyes he had never forgotten. He felt the floor tilt beneath him. Before he could process the shock tightening in his chest, another sound rose above the noise of the lobby, a soft laugh that he knew instantly, instinctively, with a certainty that punched the air out of his lungs. He hadn't heard that laugh in 5 years, yet it felt as familiar as breathing. He turned slowly, almost afraid to confirm what his body already knew. Lily stood near the far side of the lobby, speaking with a hotel staff member as she helped adjust decorations for the evening's children's event. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, her cheeks flushed from exertion, and her posture focused as she gave instructions. She looked stronger, more grounded, more luminous than he remembered, and for a moment he was unable to do anything but stare. Then one of the boys called out, "Mom," and all 3 rushed toward her. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. He felt it land somewhere deep inside, shattering whatever fragile distance he had maintained all these years. The children circled Lily, tugging at her sleeves, and she bent down to their level, smiling in a way that made the entire lobby seem brighter. He didn't realize he had taken a step forward until someone brushed past him. He stopped himself quickly, gripping the handle of his briefcase to steady his hands. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out everything but the sight of Lily with the boys, 3 boys who looked so unmistakably like him that coincidence was no longer something he could hide behind. He had imagined, on the rare nights he allowed himself the weakness, what their child might have looked like. But never this. Never 3. He felt an icy wave crash through his chest, regret, disbelief, confusion, and something he couldn't name, something both terrifying and profoundly hopeful. Lily finally noticed him. Her smile faltered. Her body tensed in a way that told him she was completely unprepared for this moment, just as he was. Her eyes widened, and for a second she looked like she might run. The boys tugged at her, still chattering, unaware of the way time seemed to have stopped around their mother and the stranger staring at her with devastation and awe. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Words failed him entirely. The last time he had seen her, she had been trembling and heartbroken. Now she stood surrounded by the 3 lives he had never known, 3 lives he should have been part of. The realization was overwhelming. In that single, impossible moment, fate knitted 5 silent years into a single thread and pulled it tight, binding their lives together again whether either of them was ready or not. Lily didn't move at first, as though her body couldn't decide whether to stay rooted in place or shield the boys behind her and retreat. The bustling lobby around them blurred into distant sound, softened by the heavy tension between the two of them. Ethan's chest rose and fell too quickly as he tried to steady himself, but nothing in his carefully built world had prepared him for this moment. He took a step toward her, then another, slow and cautious, as if approaching something fragile that he feared might shatter if he came too close. "Lily," he said quietly, his voice strained from the weight of everything he hadn't said for 5 years. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of the small bag hanging over her shoulder. The boys tugged at her sleeves, asking questions she didn't answer. They sensed her stillness, even if they didn't understand the reason behind it. She finally managed a reply, soft and guarded. "Ethan." Hearing his name on her lips again felt surreal, almost painful. He glanced at the children clustered near her legs, 3 boys, 3 unmistakable reflections of himself, and he felt something inside him wrench so violently he had to draw a steadying breath. "They're yours," he said, although the words sounded broken, incomplete. What he meant was they're mine, but he wasn't sure he had earned the right to say it out loud. "Yes," she answered, her chin lifting a fraction as though preparing for a confrontation she didn't want but expected anyway. "They're mine." He waited for her to add something else, anything to bridge the unbearable chasm between them, but she didn't. She kept her tone even, but the tension in her shoulders revealed all the emotions she refused to show. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" Lily hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly toward the boys. They were already distracted, chasing each other in uncoordinated circles around a nearby seating area. She let out a slow breath, resigned yet composed. "All right. Just a moment." She knelt to speak to the children, giving them instructions on where to stay and which staff member to listen to. It struck Ethan how natural she was with them, how seamless her movements were, how much warmth radiated from her in ways he remembered but had forgotten to miss. She straightened, and he led her through a side door onto a terrace where fresh snow coated the railing. The air was crisp, the sky settling into twilight, and the muffled sounds of the lobby filtered through the glass behind them. When the door closed, the silence between them grew heavier, though less chaotic than the sudden shock inside the hotel. Ethan turned toward her, but she stared out at the snowy mountains instead. Her breath formed a faint cloud in front of her lips before dissolving into the cold air. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said quietly. "I wouldn't have brought them to the lobby if I had." "I didn't know you would be here either," he admitted. "I wouldn't have expected it even in 1,000 guesses." He paused, realizing he was circling around the truth. "Lily, why didn't you tell me?" She blinked slowly, her jaw tightening. "Because you made it very clear that you wanted distance. I didn't want to force myself or my pregnancy into your life after what you said." His heart lurched. "I never meant it like that." "You may not have meant it, but those words broke something," she said, turning to face him now. Her voice didn't shake, but the memory in her eyes did. You told me you didn't want to see me like that. I thought you were rejecting me, rejecting the baby. I thought I was protecting all of us by walking away. He ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had done. Lily, I was terrified. Not of you. Not of them. Of myself. I thought I'd ruin everything the way my parents did. I thought the best thing I could do, the least harmful thing, was to step back and let you have a better life without me complicating it. Her eyes softened, but only with sadness, not forgiveness. And you think raising 3 boys alone was the better life? The words hit him harder than any accusation could. He opened his mouth, then closed it again because there was no defense, no excuse strong enough to counter what she had endured by herself. Finally, he said, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. She looked down at her hands, fingers lacing together tightly. There wasn't a day I didn't wonder whether I made the right choice leaving. But then I'd remember how you looked at me that night, like everything in you was shutting down, and I'd tell myself I couldn't put myself, or the boys, through a lifetime of being unwanted. He moved closer, but not enough to invade her space. They're not unwanted, he said, barely above a whisper. Not for a second. If I had known. Lily, if I had known there were 3 children, our children. His voice broke again. I would have fought through every fear I had. She absorbed his words in silence, her breath uneven now. He saw the exhaustion behind her strength, the years of holding everything together alone, the doubts she still carried. For the first time, the truth lay bare between them, messy, painful, but finally spoken. What do you want now, Ethan? She asked, meeting his gaze with wary eyes. You can't step in and out of their lives. They're not a shock you get to recover from. They're little boys. They love hard and quickly. If you choose to be part of their world, you can't ever disappear. Her warning was not sharp, only protective, and he felt it echo deep in his chest. I don't want to disappear, he said. Not from them, and not from you. I don't know exactly how to fix the past, but I want to try. Please, let me try. Lily exhaled slowly, her expression conflicted. She looked away again, toward the snowy hills, clearly wrestling with fear, hope, anger, and something she didn't want to name yet. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, softly but not unkindly, she answered him. Trying is a start. But I need to see what that looks like. Words aren't enough anymore. Ethan nodded, accepting what she was not yet willing to give. The cold air around them felt sharper now, but neither seemed ready to go back inside. For the first time in 5 years, they were finally facing the same truth, one that could destroy them or mend them, depending entirely on what came next. The children's event that evening was far more elaborate than Ethan expected. The resort had transformed one of its grand halls into a winter-themed wonderland, filled with shimmering lights, paper snowflakes, a small stage framed by silver curtains, and long tables covered in crafts, hot cocoa, and plates of cookies that disappeared faster than the staff could replace them. Parents chatted by the walls while their children ran wild with excitement. Ethan stood near the back at first, reluctant to intrude, but his eyes were drawn to the triplets again and again. He watched them weave in and out of the crowd, at times nearly identical in their movements, yet each still carrying his own spark. What struck Ethan most was how naturally they existed in the space, confident and carefree in a way he had never been as a child. Lily was responsible for that, he saw it clearly now. She helped coordinate everything, guiding staff, adjusting decorations, comforting a small girl who cried after spilling glitter, and somehow still managing to keep track of her 3 boys who seemed determined to test the limits of every rule in the room. Ethan caught glimpses of her smile, her ease, her competence, and it stirred something unsettling and warm in him. She had built a life he had never been part of, yet he saw pieces of himself everywhere he looked, in the boys' faces, their movements, their expressive eyes. It was almost too much to take in at once. Eventually the resort staff gathered the children to sit on the floor in front of the small stage. Lily knelt beside her sons, smoothing their hair, whispering something that made them giggle. Ethan, unable to keep pretending he wasn't staring, moved a little closer, though he still kept a respectful distance. The lights dimmed slightly as the event coordinator stepped onto the stage and announced that a short performance would begin, something the children had prepared over the past week with Lily's help. Music began to play softly, and several groups of children appeared on stage for small skits. Ethan watched politely, his attention shifting constantly toward Lily, who laughed with the parents around her and cheered every group. But then the coordinator introduced a special family moment, asking the audience to welcome Lucas, Landon, and Liam Harper to the stage. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. The triplets marched forward with the confidence of boys who had no idea how deeply their presence affected the man standing in the shadows. They took center stage, holding hands to steady each other, though they were already grinning as though they shared a secret. Lily looked surprised. Clearly she had not planned this part, and she stood up halfway, unsure whether to intervene. But the boys were already facing the audience, taking their roles very seriously. Lucas spoke first, his voice carrying loudly through the room. "We want to thank our mom," he began, glancing shyly at Lily. Landon continued in a slightly more mischievous tone, "Because she works so hard and never gets mad even when we make a mess. Which is a lot." The audience laughed softly. Lily covered her face, mortified and touched all at once. Then Liam, the smallest but the boldest, stepped forward. "And because she's the bravest person we know. She always says we can be anything we want and that families stick together no matter what." The hall grew quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable but reverent. Lily brought a hand to her mouth, trying not to cry in front of the crowd. Ethan felt a sharp ache in his chest as he watched her, realizing how much she had carried alone, how much strength she had poured into her sons without ever asking for help. Before he knew what he was doing, he moved forward. The moment felt separate from his body, as if something larger were pushing him toward the path he should have walked 5 years ago. He walked up the steps and onto the stage. The room collectively exhaled in surprise, murmurs rippling through the audience as people recognized him. Lily stiffened, her eyes widening. She hadn't expected him to intrude on something so personal. But he wasn't there to intrude. He was there because he couldn't stand in silence anymore. The boys looked up at him curiously, their blue eyes studying him with a familiarity that made his throat tighten. He knelt slightly so he wouldn't tower over them and gently rested a hand on each of their shoulders. His voice was unsteady at first, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "I didn't plan to say anything tonight," he began, glancing briefly at Lily before returning his focus to the children. "But seeing these boys on stage, hearing their words, I realized I needed to say something too." The room was silent except for the soft hum of holiday music still playing in the background. Ethan swallowed, letting the truth rise to the surface. "These boys are extraordinary. And I am grateful, more grateful than I can ever express, that the world has them because of the woman standing right there." His voice warmed, steadied. "Lily Harper is stronger than anyone I've ever known. She has raised them with more love, courage, and patience than most people could manage in a lifetime." Lily stared at him, frozen. She didn't know whether to cry, to flee, or to breathe for the first time in years. Ethan turned back to the boys. "If you'll let me," he said softly, "I would be honored to be part of your lives. Not as a visitor. Not as someone who disappears. But as the father I should have been from the day you were born." Gasps filled the room. Some parents reached for tissues, others clapped quietly even before the boys reacted. Landon blinked at him in surprise. Lucas reached for Lily's hand, instinctively checking her reaction. And Liam, bold, earnest Liam, stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck without hesitation. That single embrace tore something open inside him. Lily covered her mouth, tears escaping despite her best effort to hold them back. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she wasn't immune to the sight of her son trusting him so completely. Lucas and Landon exchanged glances, then shyly approached and hugged him too, though not as fiercely as Liam. The audience erupted into applause, touched by the unexpected scene. But for Ethan and Lily, everything else faded away. It felt like a fragile turning point, precarious but real, a moment that neither of them could have imagined even an hour earlier. Lily finally exhaled, somewhere between overwhelmed and profoundly shaken. Ethan met her gaze over the boys' heads, and for the first time she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes, a mixture of remorse, awe, and a quiet determination that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The good kind of shock had arrived, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. In the weeks that followed the New Year's event, Ethan found himself stepping into a life he had never imagined but now wanted with a fierceness that startled him. He began by taking small, careful steps, showing up every morning at the resort cafe where Lily brought the boys for breakfast before school. At first she watched him with cautious eyes, her posture subtly guarded as though expecting disappointment to strike at any moment. But he didn't push, didn't demand, didn't claim anything he hadn't earned. He simply showed up, consistently, quietly, almost humbly, and each day he tried to learn something new about the children he'd missed for so long. He learned that Lucas loved books and asked questions that required full explanations, not shortcuts. He learned that Landon couldn't resist mischief, but his troublemaking always came from a place of curiosity rather than malice. And he learned that Liam climbed into laps whenever possible, soft-hearted and affectionate, but capable of throwing tantrums epic enough to unsettle even the most patient parent. Ethan failed more than once. Liam cried the first time Ethan tried to braid his shoelaces into a double knot, Lucas asked him point-blank why he didn't live with them, and Landon nearly convinced him that climbing on top of the snowblower was allowed, but Ethan kept trying. Each mistake pushed him to do better. Each success rooted him deeper into their world. He discovered parts of himself he didn't recognize, parts that had never existed before. He found patience he'd never needed in the boardroom. He found humor he'd thought he'd lost. He found pride in tiny victories, like assembling a Lego tower without stepping on pieces or figuring out how to make pancakes without burning half the batter. But most surprising of all was how naturally the boys accepted him. They didn't question his presence for long. Children rarely dwell on complications the way adults do. They saw him trying, and for them, that was enough, for now. Lily, however, was a different story. She watched him from a careful distance, always analyzing, always guarded, even when she tried not to be. She had spent 5 years surviving on her own strength, and the idea of letting anyone, especially Ethan, carry part of the weight felt unnatural. She didn't know how to rely on someone she once trusted and lost. She didn't know whether he would stay this time, or whether the pain of losing him again would be unbearable. Yet she couldn't deny the changes she saw in him. He didn't move through life with the same rigid detachment anymore. He smiled more. He knelt to tie shoes. He listened rather than commanded. He softened around the boys in ways she'd never seen before, even in the early days of their relationship. The first time she watched Liam fall asleep on Ethan's chest in the lounge of the resort, she felt something inside her crack, not with fear, but with a fragile, aching tenderness she wasn't ready to name. One afternoon she found him sitting on the carpet of her small living room, reading aloud from a children's adventure book while the triplets draped themselves around him like overexcited satellites. Lucas leaned against his arm, following the words with intense concentration. Landon interrupted every few sentences to act out a scene or supply his own version of events. Liam, predictably, had wedged himself onto Ethan's lap and was playing with the buttons on his shirt. Ethan managed all of it with tired amusement, pausing to redirect or explain without growing impatient. Lily stood unseen in the doorway, her hand pressed lightly over her heart as she watched him. She realized then how much effort he was putting in, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to know them, wanted to love them, wanted to earn a place he had forfeited years ago. It was the first time she truly believed that he might stay. But letting him back into her life was far more complicated than letting him bond with the boys. She carried 5 years of memories, sleepless nights, hospital visits when the boys had gotten sick all at once, birthdays celebrated with homemade cupcakes because she couldn't afford store-bought cakes, countless decisions made without a partner beside her. There were nights she cried quietly after the boys fell asleep, wishing someone could hold her just for a moment and tell her everything would be all right. Those wounds didn't heal simply because the man who had abandoned her was now trying to make amends. She needed time, reassurance, actions rather than promises. Still, she found herself drawn to him despite herself. When he arrived at the resort early one snowy morning with hot chocolate for the boys and a coffee made exactly the way she liked it, she hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. Their hands brushed, just barely, but the jolt of recognition between them was unmistakable. Neither spoke about it, yet both felt it linger long after the moment passed. As winter melted slowly into spring, the tension between them shifted. It was no longer sharp and painful but soft, hesitant, and alive with possibilities. Ethan began to accompany them to the park on weekends, where he pushed swings, steadied bikes, and listened as Lily talked about her work and the boys' milestones he had missed. He apologized not with grand speeches but with consistency, patience, and a humility that surprised her more each day. And though Lily remained cautious, she couldn't ignore the way her heart eased when he walked into a room or how natural it felt when the boys included him in their routines. One evening, after a particularly tiring day, Lily sat on the couch with a cup of tea while the boys watched cartoons. Ethan had stayed late to help fix a broken cabinet hinge. When he finished, he sat on the opposite end of the couch, careful not to crowd her. They talked quietly, not about the past but about small everyday things. The conversation drifted easily, and for the first time in years, Lily felt something dangerous and delicate inside her, comfort, perhaps even trust, taking root. She wasn't ready to let him in completely. Not yet. But for the first time since she left him, she began to imagine what life might look like if she did. And as she watched him gather sleeping boys into his arms one by one and carry them gently to their beds, she realized something even more unsettling. No matter how hard she fought against it, he was already becoming part of their life. And hers. When spring finally arrived, it brought with it a gentler rhythm to their days and a warmth that melted some of the distance still lingering between them. The resort became quieter as the heavy tourist season ended, and Lily found herself with a rare stretch of time off. The boys begged to visit a big city, and after some hesitation, she agreed to take them to New York for a few days. The plan was simple: sightseeing, museums, parks, but she knew the moment she mentioned the trip, Ethan would insist on helping. What she didn't expect was how thoughtfully he approached it. There were no grand gestures, no attempts to take over. Instead, he asked if he could show them the city through his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to say no. The flight was chaotic, filled with restless excitement, spilled juice, and a minor argument over who got the window seat, but the boys' joy was infectious. When they landed, Ethan was already waiting at the gate, though he tried to hide how eager he was. The boys ran to him without hesitation, nearly knocking him backward in their enthusiasm. Lily watched with a mix of warmth and uncertainty tugging at her chest. She wasn't used to sharing moments like these with anyone. New York overwhelmed the boys in the most entertaining ways. Their eyes grew wide at every skyscraper, every flashing billboard, every yellow taxi that honked too loudly. Ethan guided them through the city with a patience Lily had never seen in him before. He carried Liam on his shoulders when the child got tired, held Landon's hand as the boy asked rapid-fire questions about every building they passed, and kept an eye on Lucas, who stopped every few feet to take in something new. At one point, Lily found herself smiling without realizing it, watching Ethan navigate fatherhood with increasing ease as the boys orbited around him like he had been part of their lives from the beginning. He brought them to his office, something Lily expected to be stiff and formal, a place unsuited for small children, but it turned into a surprisingly warm experience. His employees greeted the boys with awe and amusement, whispering to each other about how uncanny the resemblance was. Ethan didn't try to downplay it or pretend it wasn't obvious. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on each of their backs as he introduced them, saying simply, "These are my sons." The words echoed in Lily's mind long after they left the building. Inside his office, the boys explored everything, touching the edge of his desk, spinning in his leather chair, gazing out the massive windows like they were looking at the edge of the world. Ethan didn't correct them or rush them. Instead, he knelt beside them and explained how the city worked below, how cars looked like toys from this height and how people became tiny dots in the distance. For a moment Lily couldn't look away from him, from the man who had once been afraid of fatherhood now embracing it with a kind of reverence. When the boys were distracted with the view, Ethan stepped closer to her. He lowered his voice, and the vulnerability in it immediately put her on edge, not because it scared her, but because she felt it tug inside her fiercely. "I wanted you to see this," he said. "I wanted you to see where I finally understood what matters." Lily crossed her arms gently, trying to maintain a shield even as cracks formed in it. "It's just an office." "It used to be everything," he replied. "Now it's just a place I work." "They're everything. And you're—" He stopped himself, struggling for words. "You're the thing I haven't stopped thinking about for 5 years. I thought distance would make it easier, but every day just made the silence worse. I didn't come after you because I thought you didn't want me to. I told myself staying away was the right thing, the safest thing, but I was wrong. I was trying to protect myself, not you." His honesty was overwhelming. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "Ethan, I don't know what you expect me to say. I don't know if I can trust you again. It's not just about us anymore. It's about the boys." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for time. And I'm asking to earn it, not be given it." She looked down at her hands, the air between them charged with years of unspoken words. When she lifted her gaze again, Ethan looked less like the distant CEO she once knew and more like a man who had been humbled by life in the best possible way. She didn't answer with a yes or a no. Instead, she admitted the truth she had been afraid of. "I'm tired, Ethan. I've been tired for years. Doing everything alone changes you." "I know," he said softly, and the sincerity in his voice surprised her. "Let me carry some of it. Let me try." The boys interrupted the moment, calling them over to look at a helicopter landing on a distant rooftop. Lily stepped away instinctively, but Ethan reached lightly, hesitantly, and touched her hand. The touch was brief, almost nothing, but it sent a shock through her that she felt all the way to her throat. In the following days, something between them shifted in small but unmistakable ways. They walked through Central Park with the boys tumbling across the grass while she and Ethan fell into easier conversation. He listened when she talked, truly listened, asking questions instead of assuming he understood. He kept his pace matched to hers, no longer rushing ahead like he always had in the past. When she laughed, an unexpected, warm sound that had been buried for years, he looked at her with something like awe, as if hearing it was a gift he didn't feel entitled to. One night, after the boys had collapsed in exhaustion at the hotel, Lily stepped onto the balcony to breathe in the cool city air. She didn't hear Ethan approach, but she sensed him when he stopped beside her. They didn't speak at first, watching the skyline shimmer in the distance. Finally, he broke the silence. "Lily, I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love you the right way." Her breath caught, but she didn't look at him. Love wasn't the issue. Trust was. "I want to earn both. His voice was steady. "And I'm not going anywhere, not again." She turned her head slightly. His eyes held the same bright blue as the boy's, but deeper now, softened by the last 5 years. She didn't give him an answer, not a clear one, but the faintest shift in her expression, the subtle relaxing of her shoulders, told him she wasn't closing the door anymore. For the first time since she had left him broken and afraid in that office years ago, they stood together not as strangers separated by pain, but as two people inching, carefully and uncertainly, toward the possibility of something they'd both lost and maybe, just maybe, could find again. Summer arrived with a kind of warmth that made everything feel softer, brighter, and almost unreal. The resort had begun preparing for its seasonal festivities, and the lakeside area, where strings of warm golden lights were hung between the trees, became the heart of it all. Lily hadn't expected anything more than a simple celebration for the community, a familiar event she had helped organize year after year. But this time was different, marked by a feeling she couldn't quite name, a flutter of anticipation mixed with an unspoken shift that had been building slowly over the past months. The boys were ecstatic from the moment they heard about the upcoming event. They tried on outfits, practiced dances they invented themselves, and talked endlessly about the fireworks that would illuminate the lake. Ethan insisted he would fly in early to help, and Lily found herself agreeing, even welcoming the idea, without the hesitation that had once made her second-guess every step involving him. When he arrived, something in her chest loosened. He moved through preparations as though he had been part of their traditions for years, stringing lights with the boys, carrying boxes for the staff, and assembling a platform near the shoreline where the evening speeches would take place. Lily watched him from a distance at first, noticing how naturally he fit into their world now. There was a grounded ease in him, a certainty that replaced the fear she once saw in his expression. The triplets stayed glued to his side, competing for his attention, showing him their handcrafted decorations, climbing onto his shoulders whenever possible. Every time he laughed, a quieter, richer sound than she remembered, Lily felt something steady inside her begin to anchor. The evening of the celebration arrived with a cool breeze brushing over the lake and lights twinkling across the water like reflections of stars. Families gathered with picnic blankets, the scent of grilled food drifting across the open space. As dusk settled, the warm glow of lanterns illuminated the path leading to the decorated pergola where the main event would take place. Lily wore a soft, flowing white dress she hadn't worn in years, its fabric moving gently with every step. She hadn't dressed up for anyone in a long time, yet tonight she found herself wanting to, although she didn't admit that even to herself. When Ethan saw her, he paused mid-conversation, unable to hide the way he lost his train of thought entirely. She noticed it, felt heat rise to her cheeks, and looked away quickly, but the moment stayed suspended between them like a tender note neither dared to acknowledge aloud. The boys ran circles around them until the coordinator called everyone to gather by the pergola. Lily took their hands and began leading them forward. Ethan walked beside her, close enough for their shoulders to brush occasionally. Every small contact sent a ripple through her, but she didn't pull away. The ceremony began with light-hearted speeches and acknowledgments of the staff, followed by a few performances from local children. Then, unexpectedly, the coordinator smiled and announced that there was one more moment planned before the fireworks. Lily frowned, confused. She hadn't scheduled anything else. The crowd parted slightly as the boys appeared on stage, each holding a white card decorated with glitter and uneven handwriting. Lily's heart skipped when she saw them. She turned instinctively toward Ethan, but he was already stepping forward, offering her his hand so she could join him near the platform. She hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. His fingers closed warmly around hers. The boys lifted their cards toward the audience, revealing the phrase they had worked on in secret. Lily's breath caught as she read it, "We choose our dad." A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. Some people gasped softly, some smiled knowingly. Lily's eyes burned as she watched her sons beaming with pride, completely unaware of the magnitude of their gesture. Ethan knelt down and opened his arms, and the boys rushed toward him, folding themselves against him with the uninhibited affection only children possess. Lily pressed a hand over her mouth, her vision blurring. She had expected many things from this evening: chaos, joy, exhaustion, but nothing like this. Nothing as pure and breathtaking. When the boys stepped aside, giving space as though they somehow understood this next part wasn't theirs, Ethan stood and faced her fully. The murmuring crowd faded into a distant hum, the setting sun casting warm amber light over them both. He took a steady breath, and she saw no fear in him now, only honesty. 5 years ago, he said quietly, I lost you because I let fear guide me. I thought running from the possibility of being a father meant protecting you. But all I did was hurt you and miss the most important years of our sons' lives. His voice softened. And I missed you, Lily. More than I ever allowed myself to admit. She felt her throat tighten, tears forming faster than she could blink them away. He stepped closer. I can't change the past, and I won't pretend it didn't break something in both of us. But I want to spend the rest of my life repairing what I can, building what should have been, and giving our boys the family they deserve. Not because I feel guilty. Not because I'm trying to make up for lost time. But because I love you. I always have. And now I know how to show it. The crowd held its breath as the boys lifted another card from behind them, revealing words glittering faintly beneath the lantern light. Say yes, Mom. A soft laugh burst from Lily despite her tears. She covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed, then lowered her hands as she looked at Ethan, really looked at him. The man standing before her was not the one who had pushed her away 5 years ago. This was someone transformed by loss, by love, by the unexpected beauty of fatherhood. She took a slow breath and let it out, her voice shaking but sure. Yes, she said, the word trembling into the warm evening air. Yes, Ethan. The crowd erupted in applause, children cheered, and the boys hooped in victory. Ethan reached for her, pulling her into his arms, and for the first time in years, she didn't resist. She felt whole in a way she had forgotten was possible. Fireworks burst into the sky moments later, coloring the lake in bright reflections, and the boys danced around them shouting, "We're the Rhodes family now." Ethan kissed her forehead, then her lips, gently at first, then with the certainty of a man who finally understood what it meant to hold on instead of letting go. Lily melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her heart settling into a place it had long been denied. As the fireworks continued to crackle overhead and the boys laughed around them, Lily realized that this moment, unexpected, dazzling, born from years of pain and healing, was the beginning of their true life together. And this time, nothing in the world could pull them apart.